is Washington State's 19th Attorney General, elected into office in November 2024. Nick believes the Attorney General's role is to serve as the people's advocate and is committed to using the legal tools and the power of the AG's office to uphold and enforce Washington's laws, to protect people's rights, to stand up for our shared values, and to keep people safe. Having grown up in Steilacoe Cove, Nick is a proud product of public schools and the son of public servants. His dad was an Army veteran, and his mom was a nurse and healthcare administrator. Determined to follow his parents' example, Nick joined the ROTC to help pay for college, graduating from Morehouse and then going on to attain a law degree from Harvard University. Nick then began his legal career in the Army JAG Corps, where he gained experience as both a prosecutor and defense attorney. He took on unscrupulous corporations and predatory lenders that were taking advantage of soldiers and their families, and defended the rights and liberties of young soldiers. Nick was awarded a Bronze Star in 2005. After the Army, Nick returned to Washington State, where he worked as a prosecutor. He then went on to become the lead counsel for Governor Jay Inslee. During that time, he learned how to make government work effectively on behalf of the public and had the opportunity to work on a wide range of legal issues, including many focused on keeping people safe. At the governor's direction, Nick led the work to put a moratorium on the death penalty in Washington, and then during the first 6 months of the Trump administration, Nick worked directly with the governor and then Attorney General Bob Ferguson in taking on the Trump's early unlawful actions, including his Muslim ban. Leaving the governor's office in 2017, Nick worked in the private sector, joining one of the premier law firms in the region. There he helped public, private, and non-public clients navigate complex civil litigation and constitutional issues. Part of his work involved Nick taking a lead role in defending landmark gun safety legislation from legal challenges. In 2021, President Joe Biden nominated Nick to become the U.S. Attorney for Western Washington, where he worked to fight drug cartels and sex trafficking, addressing the fentanyl crisis, and reducing violent crime. He also chaired the Attorney General's Advisory Subcommittee on Civil Rights and brought a focus on keeping every Washingtonian safe by preventing and prosecuting hate crimes and protecting, and I'm almost there, all right? Almost there. This is so good. Protecting most volunteers and members of marginalized communities. In 2023, Nick resigned from the U.S. Attorney's Office to seek the office of Attorney General. As Attorney General, Nick's focus is on getting results that benefit Washington State residents and tangibly improve their lives. His key areas of focus include protecting public safety, advancing environmental and worker protection, standing up for civil rights, and holding the powerful to account when they violate our laws and harm people of our state. And might I add that Nick is a resident of West Seattle. Please put your hands together and welcome Mr. Attorney General Nick Brown.
Get nervous when people stand at the beginning of my remarks. When I have said nothing whatsoever. If you feel so compelled at the end to rise, then I'll take it. And as he was reading that bio, which seems very lengthy now, I was getting worried that he was going to leave off the best part, is that I am a proud West Seattle resident. I always championed West Seattle. I moved back up here after leaving the governor's office in 2017, down near Lincoln Park, and now live in Highland Park. And as I look around, there are people here that I recognize from the community, so it's good to see folks here. And What I thought I would do is share a little bit about what it's been like to be the Chief Legal Officer for the state of Washington for the last 10 months. It feels closer to 10 years sometimes, but really welcome the opportunity to hear from you all and answer any questions that I have. Because as big and important and high profile of a job this is, I'm still learning a lot about the position myself, and I also recognize that most Washingtonians, they read the things that we do in the headlines, but there's so much about what we do in the office that is new or surprising to people, and so I welcome your questions about anything. I may not answer everything, but I welcome your questions about anything. Let me just start by saying, despite all of the chaos of the last 10 months and the turmoil and the challenge of this job, I love being in this position. I cannot imagine being in another role at another time, in another place than where I am right now. And I feel fortunate, having been a Washingtonian since I was 2 years old and having been in and around government and public service for so long, I feel so lucky to be in this position and to be working with so many people across the state whose sole job and focus is trying to make Washington a better place. And I want to start there by lifting up the people that I work with at this time where public service is often criticized and derided and looked down upon. There's so many dedicated people who come to work every day trying to figure out ways to improve government and improve the quality of life for people all across Washington. And a lot of people don't recognize that the Attorney General's office is the largest law firm in the state. Indeed, we're the second largest law firm on the West Coast, second only to the California Attorney General's office, which has a few more people than we do. But I have about 830 lawyers that work for me. They work for me on behalf of you. It's a lot. And another 900 or so, or over 900 professional staff of policy analysts, investigators, researchers, communications, legislative folks. We have 13 offices all across Washington state, a big one in Olympia, obviously, a really big one in Seattle, but regional offices all across our state. And we are uniquely situated, and part of the reason that we're so big is that we, as a matter of law, represent every single state board, agency, commission, committee that is authorized in the Constitution or in statute, which makes us somewhat unusual as an Attorney General's office. In many states, state and government agencies can hire their own lawyers directly or have their own in-house counsel that are not technically part of the Attorney General's office. And so like in many states, for example, the Attorney General does not represent the public universities, whereas we do. The University of Washington division of the AG's office, for example, is one of the biggest divisions that we represent. As you might imagine, our public university clients have a myriad of issues, from student conduct to labor issues, to funding issues, to challenges from Washington, D.C. And so we represent every single agency all the way down to the things like the state potato commission. And when I got my first question about a potato legal issue, I was so stressed. Not the reason that I ran for office, but the variety of this work is so fascinating to me. And I also recognize that I get to come to work and do things that matter every single day. Every single thing that we're doing is touching issues that are impacting your lives, in your family's lives, in our communities, in ways that you may see and you may read about, and also many ways that you may not. We work on issues impacting public education, both K-12 education and higher education. We work on things like healthcare and the provision of healthcare services for families and individuals. We work on a myriad of environmental and climate-related issues, trying to make sure that we're protecting our environment for future generations. We do things like consumer protection, and that is one place where so many people in the public actually first learn about the work, because when companies or businesses or organizations are using misleading business practices or defrauding you or misrepresenting what a product does or merging together in a way that maybe provides less options for consumers, that is the place where we interface with the public so often. We're also working on a myriad of housing-related issues, which is one of the most pressing issues that across Washington state that people are concerned about. So we have litigation, for example, right now against a company called RealPage. RealPage uses an algorithm to falsely inflate their rental prices, which increases rents all in many properties in King County and Snohomish County. We also have a case against a facility that runs senior housing, that advertised their housing facilities as being luxury and very high-end, and they were very far from that, and had their residents, seniors, locked into rental agreements that were abusive or took advantage of them. So we do so many things that touch people's lives, and it's really fun for me to be in this position. And every now and then we sue the President of the United States. And let me say, and I'm going to talk about that work because it is the work that is most often in the headlines. Let me start by saying I appreciate people who support the work that we're doing against the administration, but it also saddens me a great deal, frankly, that so much of our work is focused on protecting Americans from their president. And that is how I feel about our litigation against the administration. And you heard a little bit about my biography. I have spent the vast majority of my my career as a lawyer in public service. I started my career in uniform as an Army JAG lawyer, serving soldiers and their families. I come from a family of veterans. I worked for the Department of Justice for many years, both as a line prosecutor when I was first hired under the Bush administration, and then as the U.S. Attorney under the Biden administration. I say all that to say that I really love our country. I believe in it. I consider myself a patriot. I believe in the possibility of government to improve people's lives in very important ways. I also believe that we are facing a torrent of un-American activity from the presidency, illegal actions, unconstitutional actions that are harming Washingtonians. And when we see that, when we see things that are illegal or unconstitutional, that are harming or impacting Washingtonians, then we have an obligation, I think I have an obligation under my oath of office to step in, to make sure that we are advocating for people and programs in Washington that are harmed by things that we see from Washington, D.C. If we see things that we don't like, that are not illegal, we don't litigate. If we see things that are illegal but don't impact Washington or Washington agencies, then we don't litigate. And sometimes we have to make a resource decision, even if we see the first two, about whether it's best for us to be involved in a case. And so on the one hand, we're involved in 41 cases against the administration. For a little bit of context, there are about 55 lawsuits that at least one of my colleagues, Democratic Attorney Generals, has filed challenging something from the administration. So I have not chosen to join every case. My team's analysis of an action differs from my colleagues from time to time, or sometimes there are things that happen from the administration that just aren't impacting Washington in the same way. A good example is when we were dealing with the federal firing cases. We took that very seriously because we have a lot of federal employees here, but the case was led out of D.C. and Maryland because they have a high concentration of federal employees. But there are some states that just had a much smaller impact locally, and so not every one of my colleagues joined that case. But time and time again, we have found ourselves in this position of seeing things that we feel like we need to be engaged in. And I would put those cases in two broad categories. One are what I view as pure civil rights related cases. The very first case that we filed the day after the president took office was challenging the president's attempt to rewrite the Constitution when it comes to birthright citizenship in America, which is well ingrained in our Constitution, is well ingrained in Supreme Court precedent. There is a process by which people can challenge that or try to overturn it, but it does not come from executive order. So we filed a case the day after that order came out, and we will be back in the Supreme Court on that matter in early next year, probably. We were the first state in the country to lead that litigation. And there are other cases that are touching on issues impacting people's individual liberties and civil rights. But the vast majority of our cases are dealing with protecting funding to Washington State. Because the administration has attempted, we think illegally, contrary to both Supreme Court precedent, but most importantly, contrary to congressional authorization, they've tried to cut and end programs that were impacting Washington State. And that includes a myriad of different programs. It includes environmental development and protection programs. So the prior administration passed and Congress authorized, as a matter of law, funding for an electric vehicle infrastructure all throughout the country, in particular the West Coast. And the president came in and tried to cancel that. And it was tens of millions of dollars to Washington that had already been approved by Congress. And if you want to change that, then you go back to Congress and say, we changed our mind. You don't just simply do an executive order. They also tried to cut education funding to Washington State. That was going directly to school districts all across Washington State. They tried to cut some of that money because some of our funding goes to students who are undocumented. Because Washington's belief is that you need an education regardless of where you came from. That money was tried to be cut. We litigated and prevailed and protected that money for school districts. We also successfully fought to defend crime victims' money. There was a law passed in the 80s under the Victims of Crime Act. It was signed into law by Ronald Reagan, a very woke, progressive individual. But it literally does exactly what it says. It's Victims of Crimes Act that provides financial assistance for victims of crimes. And there was about $21 million directly to Washington that the administration canceled. That was going to both government agencies and nonprofits that provide things like shelter services for victims of domestic violence, medical bills for people who have suffered abuse, anti-human trafficking and sex trafficking money. That money was canceled. And it wasn't necessarily because the administration didn't like the programs. It was because our programs also provide services for people that were LGBTQI or for who were undocumented. And that is what made us a target. And also some of our programs had language that was suggestive of that we have DEI policies in Washington, which remain legal under Washington state law. And so they tried to strip away about $21 million of things, money, programs that keep Washington safe. And so my decision was to join that case because I think it increases public safety in Washington. And all told in our cases, we've successfully protected $14 billion of cuts to Washington state. That's a lot of money. Because, even though we are a quote-unquote blue state, not everybody agrees with what we do as an agency, which is fine. We represent everyone. But one of the biggest sort of criticisms that I take when I, make the mistake of looking at my Twitter account on my official side, or the complaints from people in the legislature or elected officers is, why are you spending so much time focused on Washington, D.C., and why don't you focus on issues at home? And every single case that we brought against the administration is specifically about Washington. It's about impacts to Washington. And I do not think I would be fulfilling my oath if we were not involved in this litigation. And I continue to think that we're going to be on the right side of the law and the right side of history. Let me just end with this, and then I welcome your questions. Is that no matter where I go, people most often are focused on or thinking about Washington, D.C. and the impacts here. That is really important, but I continue to believe that the things that most matter to most people, the things that you and I and your friends and family worry about or wake up thinking about, public safety, healthcare, the quality of our children's educations, most of those things have nothing to do with Washington, D.C. They have to do with what's happening at your state capitol in Olympia or at your city hall and your county government. How much taxes we pay, the quality of our transportation. I think 90% of the things that we just individually think about are here. And if you're looking or thinking about how to impact some of the things that are happening now, I truly think it's here. And I commend you as Rotarians for bringing that focus here, because there's so much good work that we can do in our communities that will help improve people's lives. And there are people, particularly some of the most vulnerable, who are in this moment scared for their future, for their livelihood, for their safety. They need our help as much as anyone right now. And I would encourage all of you to continue to lean into that work, because I think it's really, really important. Okay, thank you. This gavel as a lead.
This is my gavel, okay? I said it here.
As the president of the club, you could have one.
I'm Amy Wiedenethal with the Center for Active Living, formerly the Senior Center, so thank you for supporting seniors. But you said, you didn't tell us why you decided to run. So why did you decide to run for Attorney General?
So for many years, my dream job was the job that I most recently had, to be the United States Attorney for Western Washington. I have always felt that I kind of grew up professionally as a federal prosecutor. I've always had so much reverence for the Department of Justice, a reverence that is almost evaporated in the last 10 months, frankly. But that was my dream job. And you know, I'd sort of thought about running for public office over the years, but this is the first time I ran for public office, except for 8th grade student body president.
Did you win that?
I did. I had to convince about 100 people to vote for me. But as I sort of debated about whether to give up my dream job, there were two things that really were on top of mind for me. One was just purely practical. As a United States Attorney, you serve at the pleasure of the President. And every administration changes out the vast majority, if not all, of their U.S. attorneys. And as I was thinking about 2024, I did not want my job to depend on what happens in Michigan or Pennsylvania, or that has nothing to do with me. And I thought I would bet on myself rather than on America. And that was a good wager. The other thing really gets to the last point I made, is that the work that I found most rewarding in my career was the 4+ years I spent in Olympia working for Governor Inslee. And the ability to impact things directly. You know, it's very hard to change or get Congress to do anything. They don't pass many bills, frankly. In Olympia, it felt very tangible and real. And my first day as governor's counsel, we started working on what became the moratorium on the death penalty. And I just could not imagine sitting on the sidelines and watching the election and then watching the next Attorney General, and I wanted to be a part of it.
Hey Nick, I'm George. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to come talk to us and just hang out in West Seattle. But I'm just really curious. Obviously in your career you've met probably some amazing people. So out of all those people, I'm just curious, which one would you say is your favorite politician, governor, senator, or someone that you might idolize or you consider maybe your favorite? I know that you probably don't have favorites, but someone that stands out.
Do I have to choose a politician? Well, let me ground it a little bit. And this sort of gets back to the last question as well. As someone who has been around government and I, since my own personal life, I've always been intrigued by politics and politicians. And as a young person in particular, but not exclusively, you get this idea that people in important positions are incredibly special or incredibly talented or unique. Most of us are not. And that was a good revelation for me. When I got down to Olympia, I was 35. And I recognized immediately, or very quickly, that the people that I was interfacing with, some were very talented, or very smart. Many were just average like the rest of us, right? And it was a good experience for me to recognize that the people that are making decisions on our lives are the same sort of people like you went up to high school with, right? I was working for the governor, and I was like, well, this is the kid from Ingram High School. He was smart, he had his talents, but he was not extraordinary. And I think we sometimes idolize or hero worship, or the opposite, like they think these are masters of evil or opposition sometimes. I met the former President Obama one time, and I had this sort of admiration for him, and there were things about him that I found personally relatable to me. He's black, but he's biracial like I am. He's a Harvard Law grad. We're both left-handed, if you're all you know, and so I had a lot of admiration and for him, and so meeting him was great. But the person that I would say is not a politician to me is Brian Stevenson. Brian Stevenson leads many things at this stage, but he has been a lifelong civil rights advocate, criminal justice advocate. He runs what I think is the most extraordinary museum in America in Montgomery, Alabama, and I implore you, if you have an opportunity, to visit his 2 facilities down there. It's extraordinary. He has the most popular TED Talk ever, talking about his work on death penalty work. He is an extraordinarily brilliant and kind person. When I was chair of the Civil Rights Subcommittee for U.S. Attorneys, we led a meeting in Alabama around the Selma March, and Brian came and spoke to us, and I was fanboying a little bit.
Brian Stevenson, something else. But my name's
I don't think your mic's on.
My name's Brian, and I'm left-handed. I've been confused about the relationship between the federal government and the state government. And this organization, you will go through this room and you will have a wide variety of political viewpoints. And yet we meet every week, and we're frequently socializing together, and we like each other. Well, what I don't understand about the relationship is, can the state, for example, enforce basic human standards at, for example, the ICE facility in Tacoma? You know, health, hygiene, basic sanitary standards, and human standards. Can the state, for example, if a Seattle police officer were to rough somebody up or kill them, they'd be hauled in front of a federal grand jury, most likely.
You might put out again.
Oh, okay. Well, can the state enforce its criminal laws against federal employees? You know, issues like that, the relationship, who gets to say what can be, what's legal and not legal as between the two?
Well, I would say a few things. One, where you started with, we need to continue to talk to each other. I think it is vital for the literal survival of our democracy. That sounds more dramatic than it, but I believe it. I believe when we stop talking to each other, we have immense problems in America. And so, and I don't want to be with people who disagree with me. And I think we should continue to have robust debate about issues of importance and go through both things like this, but also our legislative process to hash out solutions for those things. In terms of the relationship with the federal and state, some areas are very clear and some are very confusing, and there's a lot of overlap. For the ICE facility specifically, as a general matter, it is not subject to state regulatory authority. We don't have the ability to do the same kinds of oversight that you're talking about that we would for a Department of Corrections state-run facility, for example. That is a federal facility, federally contracted, federal employees, and our oversight there is very limited. When it comes to law enforcement-related issues, we have a lot of authority over state and local officers, and the AG's office has investigated those officers or advising those agencies that do. When you're talking about federal issues, it will be both a local, state, and federal matter. And so if a federal officer violated somebody's civil rights, it might be a state civil rights violation, or it might be a federal civil rights violation, and there could be concurrent investigations and prosecutions of someone like that. But, you know, multiple billions of dollars of the Washington state budget is federally funded, like many cities. And so even things like our public university and healthcare systems, which are state-run, they rely on federal money to do their research and funding, and so there's dual cross purposes alike. You know, and it's not surprising for me as a political matter, but it's surprising for me as just a legal and frankly moral issue. You know, we as Democratic AGs, we're in a lot of cases. No Republican AG has joined any of our cases. And some of that I get. But when we're talking about protecting funding to a state, you know, the states that most benefit from federal funding are more conservative states. That's just factual. I think Alabama is the single largest recipient of federal dollars. When they tried to cut, and successfully did cut some of the NIH, the National Institute of Health funding, we litigated because there was 150-something million at risk for University of Washington, Washington State University, other cases. But Alabama, certainly on a per capita basis, receives hundreds of millions of dollars, and they didn't do anything. When they tried to strip away education funding for local districts, that was a nationwide problem, and none of the Republican AGs decided to engage. And in some of those issues, it meant they lost money. And so I think they let politics dictate what was beneficial from their residents. But the interplay from the feds and state is complicated, to put it mildly.
All right, we have time for just one more question. I am so sorry. Just one last question.
No pressure.
First, thank you very much for being here. My name is Kenny Austin. My question for you is, in the past several months, we have seen ICE and Border Patrol's tactics getting more violent, more dangerous for people. 2 months ago, we saw in Los Angeles, a 79-year-old business owner questioned why ICE was in his business, and they threw him to the ground so hard he broke his ribs and suffered brain damage. A month ago, a 5-year-old girl, a U.S. citizen, was held by ICE outside her home, and they refused to let her go until her immigrant father surrendered himself. 2 weeks ago, we saw Border Patrol agents descend from Black Hawk helicopters and jump out of trucks and storm an apartment complex, breaking down doors, shattering windows, zip tying citizens and immigrants alike, including children, and detaining them for hours. It's only a matter of time before this comes to Seattle. So my question for you is, what should we do? And what does your office fit in when we see tactics like this in our neighborhoods?
Let me start with what I think you should do, and or where I see the area of need where individuals can help fill. And it's broader than just sort of the ICE tactics, but it's around immigration issues generally. There are so many people now in Washington that are living in a state of fear, and they should be, because I think they're being specifically targeted. Frankly, I think fear is part of the point of these tactics. Beyond simple enforcement, I think creating that tension is intentional. I wish I didn't believe that, frankly. Part of the reason that we know about some of the abuses that you talked about is because there have been other people there with them and advocating for them. And so I think there is a really important role for individuals to help be present for people who do not have their own advocates. That might include, accompanying somebody to an immigration appointment. That might include volunteering your time or your skills with other organizations that directly serve immigrant communities. For my money, I know there's some lawyers here. Northwest Immigrant Rights Project does incredible work. Northwest Justice Project has some tangent-related issues. And so finding ways to dedicate some of your time to that, I think, is really important. We are, of course, very closely monitoring what's happening in other cities and states, and I will tell you that we were involved in helping those states in some of their challenges, because my team, not only during my 10 months, but during my predecessor's time, I spent a lot of time researching and being involved and preparing for this moment. And so when it happened in Los Angeles, we were helping them draft. We led the amicus brief on behalf of Oregon. I think, unfortunately, the Supreme Court is going to continue to allow most of what we've seen. When California challenged some of these issues, factually, they just weren't prepared for the moment, because it was the first time it happened, and some of the things that we were hoping that they would document and be prepared for in the litigation they didn't do the way that was ideal. Oregon pretty much did. They had people on the ground, they had declarations ready to go. The facts, I mean, Portland has its troubles, but it is not a war-torn city. The Secretary of Homeland Security the other day compared Antifa to Hamas and MSN-13. Literal terrorist organizations that my office has helped prosecute, my former office. It's so absurd that that would come from the Secretary of Homeland Security. I mean, whatever your political beliefs are, to compare Antifa, which is not really an organization, to the most dangerous drug trafficking cartel in the world, MS-13, is beyond the pale, and it was a blur. And what I will say though, and I'm getting a little bit aside, but we will be prepared to challenge things that we think are I think the challenge is very steep. There's no justification currently that we feel that would justify nationalization of the National Guard, federalization of the National Guard, or anything of the like, but we will be prepared to do it. Thank you.
Please stand. Give a round of applause.